The days stretched into weeks as the group slowly made their way westward. The journey was grueling, and the constant threat of shadows kept them on edge, but the thought of reaching the evacuation point spurred them on. They followed the old highways, sticking to the back roads and avoiding major cities, which had become infested with shadows and other dangers. The terrain grew more rugged as they neared the mountains, and the group found themselves navigating steep inclines and narrow passes. One evening, as they made camp in the shadow of a large rock formation, Elena gathered the group around. She unfurled the map Ava had found at the gas station and pointed to a spot near the western coast. "We're getting close," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and caution. "If this map is accurate, we should reach the evacuation point within the next few days." Ava looked at the map, her heart racing. "Do you think it's still there? The evacuation point, I mean." "We have to believe it is," Marcus said, his voice steady. "It's all we've got." Jonas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We should be prepared for anything. The closer we get, the more likely we are to run into trouble." Karen glanced at the surrounding wilderness, her brow furrowed in concern. What if there are others? People who got the same message and decided to make the journey? "Then we'll deal with it when we get there," Elena replied firmly. "But we can't afford to turn back now. We've come too far." The group settled in for the night, their minds filled with the possibilities of what lay ahead. The closer they got to the evacuation point, the more real the prospect of escape became. But with that hope came the fear of what they might find, or not find, when they arrived. As the sun began to rise the next morning, casting a pale light over the rugged landscape, the group packed up their camp and resumed their journey. The air was crisp and cool, a welcome change from the oppressive heat they had endured in the city. The terrain grew increasingly difficult, with steep inclines and rocky paths that tested their endurance. But the group moved with a renewed sense of purpose, their eyes fixed on the horizon. On the third day after leaving the gas station, they finally caught sight of the distant coastline. The sight of the ocean, vast and seemingly endless, filled them with a mix of awe and trepidation. It was a stark reminder of how far they had come, and how far they still had to go. As they descended from the mountains, the landscape leveled out into a series of rolling hills and open fields. The air was thick with the scent of salt water, and the distant cry of seagulls could be heard on the wind. "We're close," Elena said, her voice filled with anticipation. "Just a few more miles." The group pushed forward, their pace quickening with each step. The sun was setting behind them, casting long shadows across the fields as they neared their destination. As they crested a final hill, they saw it, a large fortified compound on the edge of a cliff, overlooking the ocean. The walls were high and well-maintained, with guard towers positioned at each corner. Ava's heart leaped at the sight. "Is this it?" "It has to be," Marcus replied, his voice filled with wonder. "It matches the coordinates exactly." They approached the compound cautiously, unsure of what to expect. As they neared the gates, they were met by a group of armed guards, men and women dressed in worn but functional uniforms, their faces hardened by years of survival. "Hold it right there!" one of the guards called out, raising a hand. "Who are you, and what's your business here?" Elena stepped forward, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "We received a message, a holographic message, directing us here. We're survivors just like you." The guard eyed them warily, his gaze sweeping over each member of the group. After a tense moment, he lowered his weapon and nodded. "All right, you can come in, but you'll need to speak with our leader first." The group exchanged relieved glances as the gates slowly opened, revealing the interior of the compound. It was a sprawling facility, with barracks, storage buildings, and even a small garden. As they entered the compound, the group couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and caution. The sight of the well-maintained structures and organized layout was both comforting and disconcerting. It was clear that this place had been prepared for long-term survival. But what kind of leadership governed it? And could they be trusted? The guards escorted them through the compound, past other survivors who paused in their tasks to watch the newcomers with curiosity and suspicion. It was clear that this was a close-knit community, wary of outsiders, but not openly hostile. Finally, they were brought to a large building that appeared to serve as the central command post. Inside, the air was cool and clean, a stark contrast to the musty, stale environments they had grown accustomed to in their travels. A tall woman with sharp features and a commanding presence stood waiting for them, flanked by 2 more guards. Her piercing eyes assessed them quickly, taking in their weary appearances and the tension in their posture. "I'm Commander Reese," she introduced herself, her voice firm but not unkind. "I understand you received a message leading you here. You're not the first, and I suspect you won't be the last." Elena stepped forward, speaking for the group. "We were told this was an evacuation point. Is that true? Is there a way off Earth?" Reese's expression softened slightly, though her gaze remained intense. "Yes, it's true. This is one of the few remaining evacuation points. We've been coordinating with what remains of the United Earth Alliance to get survivors off-world. But it's not as simple as just showing up. Resources are limited, and space on the shuttles is even more so." "How many have you evacuated so far?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the weight of the question. Reese sighed, a hint of weariness creeping into her demeanor. "Not as many as we'd like. The process is slow, and every day brings new challenges. But we're doing everything we can." Karen, who had been silent up until now, stepped forward. "We'll do whatever it takes to help. Just tell us what needs to be done." Reese nodded, seeming to appreciate the offer. "We can always use more hands. We'll get you settled in, and then we can discuss how you can contribute. But first, you need to rest. You've clearly been through a lot." The group exchanged relieved glances. After so long on the run, the thought of having a place to rest, even temporarily, was a welcome relief. As they were led to their quarters, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that they were far from the end of their journey. Yes, they had made it to the evacuation point, but what would come next? Would they truly be able to leave Earth behind? And if they did, what kind of life awaited them beyond the stars? These questions lingered in her mind as she lay down on the surprisingly comfortable cot, the sounds of the compound's activities drifting through the walls. For now, though, there was nothing to do but wait, and hope that their decision to come here had been the right one. The compound had become a fragile beacon of hope for the group. After weeks of travel and countless dangers, the sight of its fortified walls and organized community had been a welcome relief. For the first time in what felt like ages, they had found a semblance of security. The survivors had started to settle in, learning the routines of the compound, contributing where they could, and even allowing themselves a moment to breathe. But in this world, peace was always temporary. The attack came in the dead of night, when the compound was at its most vulnerable. The alarm blared suddenly, a sharp, jarring sound that jolted the entire compound awake. Ava was on her feet in an instant, her heart pounding as she grabbed for her weapon. She could hear the confusion and fear in the shouts of those outside, the heavy footfalls of people rushing to their stations. Marcus was already at the door, his face set in grim determination. "We need to move," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. Ava nodded, grabbing her pack and following him out into the corridor. The compound, which had seemed so secure just hours before, was now a scene of pandemonium. The walls shook with the force of explosions, and the air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning. "What's happening?" Ava shouted over the noise as they ran toward the command post. "Shadows!" someone yelled back. "They're breaching the perimeter!" The word sent a chill down her spine. The shadows had found them, even here. The thought was terrifying. If they could get in, what chance did anyone have? They burst into the command post, where Commander Reese was barking orders at her officers. The room was filled with the glow of monitors displaying the chaos outside. Figures moving in the darkness, the shadows converging on the walls like a living tide. Elena was already there, standing next to Reese, her face pale but resolute. She turned as Ava and Marcus entered, her eyes wide with urgency. "We have to evacuate now. There's no way we can hold them off." "Evacuation shuttles are ready," Reese said, her voice cutting through the din. "But there's a problem. We don't have enough room for everyone." The weight of her words hit them like a physical blow. Not everyone would make it out. It was an impossible situation. How could they decide who stayed and who went? "We'll have to draw straws," Reese said grimly, her expression hardening. "It's the only fair way." Ava felt a surge of panic. The thought of leaving anyone behind, of abandoning them to the shadows, was unbearable. But there was no time to argue, no time to find another solution. The shadows were closing in, and they had to act now. Reese grabbed a box of straws, her hands shaking slightly as she held it out to the gathered survivors. "Take one," she ordered. "The short straws stay behind." One by one, the survivors stepped forward, each drawing a straw in tense silence. Ava's heart pounded in her chest as she reached into the box, her fingers trembling as she pulled out a straw. She held her breath as she looked down. Long. Marcus was next. He reached in, his face impassive as he drew his straw. It was long. Elena hesitated for a moment before drawing hers. She let out a shaky breath when she saw it was long. But not everyone was as lucky. Jonas, who had been a steady presence in their group since they reunited, pulled out a short straw. His expression hardened, though he tried to keep his voice steady. "Looks like I'm staying behind." "No!" Elena exclaimed, her voice trembling with emotion. "We can't leave you here, Jonas. Not after everything." Jonas gave her a sad smile, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, Elena. You need to go. You're the leader. They need you more than they need me." Ava felt tears sting her eyes as she looked around the room at the others who had drawn short straws. Karen, Jonas, and a few others they had come to know and trust. The weight of what was happening was suffocating. "We can't just leave them," Ava cried, her voice breaking. "We have to," Reese said firmly, though her voice held a tremor of its own. "If we all try to go, we'll be overrun before we even get airborne." Karen forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "It's okay, Ava. You have to go. We'll hold them off for as long as we can." Elena stepped forward, tears in her eyes as she embraced Jonas. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." "Just survive," Jonas whispered back, his voice trembling. "That's all that matters now." The rest of the group filed out of the command post, each of them carrying the weight of the decision that had been made. The room was filled with others like Jonas and Karen, those who had drawn the short straws, those who would stay behind to buy the others a chance to escape. "Let's go," Reese ordered, her voice steely as she led the way to the shuttle bay. Ava and Marcus followed, their legs feeling like lead as they made their way through the chaos. The sounds of battle echoed around them, the screams, the gunfire, the roar of the shadows as they breached the walls. The shuttle bay was a hive of activity, survivors scrambling to board the waiting shuttles. The reality of the situation hit them as they saw the limited number of seats, the panicked faces of those trying to secure a place. "We're full!" one of the guards shouted, holding up a hand to stop the influx of people. Get on board, Reese commanded, waving Ava, Marcus, and Elena forward. We're leaving! They rushed forward, barely making it onto the shuttle as the doors closed behind them. Ava turned, her heart shattering as she caught one last glimpse of Jonas, Karen, and the others through the small window. Their faces were resolute, their fate sealed. The shuttle engines roared to life, and with a lurch, they were airborne. The compound grew smaller beneath them, the chaos receding as they ascended into the night sky. Ava couldn't tear her eyes away from the window, the weight of what they had just done crushing her. Marcus put an arm around her, pulling her close as the shuttle flew toward the unknown. We'll keep going, he said quietly, his voice filled with the same pain she felt. We have to. Elena sat beside them, silent tears running down her cheeks. The three of them were united in their grief, knowing that survival had come at a price they would carry with them forever.